Hello, this is the Lost Lake Run webinar series. The Lost Lake Run is a 16-mile mountain race that raises money for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. The Lost Lake Run is held the fourth Saturday of each August, and the 2020 Lost Lake Run will be held August 22nd. The Lost Lake Run webinar series invites a wide variety of speakers to talk about different aspects of trail running, training, nutritious, and also cystic fibrosis. For more information about the Lost Lake Run or the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, please see the notes below. I hope you enjoy this webinar. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the 9th Lost Lake Run webinar. This evening, we're fortunate to have with us the current record holder for the Lost Lake Run, Jerry Ross. Hello, Jerry. How are you?
Hey, I'm great, Patrick. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. I apologize to our participants and those that are listening on YouTube, but we had some technical difficulties earlier, and unfortunately, we're actually talking over a cell phone, and so if the acoustics isn't great, it's blame it on my computer. So, Jerry, I thank you for coming in and doing this. This is really exciting for me personally because when I got involved with the Lost Lake Run, you were just starting to kind of come into prominence in terms of record-breaking performances. But I always like to start off with the origin story. So tell me a little bit about where were you born and raised? Did you do running a lot in high school? How did you get into this? And then your resume from there forward. Love to hear it.
Okay, yeah, you bet. Well, I was born in 1975 in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and shortly thereafter, I think I was 2 years old, my mom, dad, and my younger sister and I moved up here to Anchorage. So we're stationed at G-Bear now. Which
Elmendorf or Fort Rich?
Fort Rich. So it's Fort Rich back in the day.
Yeah.
And so I grew up in the Anchorage School District. I went to Chugach Optional. I went to Romig and then Mears for a quarter and graduated from Diamond High School. So that was sort of my early Alaskan upbringing. I ended up running at Montana State and also spent 2 falls running at UAA with Coach Freeze. So I guess I've been running ever since. My first formative memory is maybe in 4th grade. I did the Stroh's Run for Liberty when it was a race, maybe in DC or here. I can't remember if it was here or in DC, and I definitely remember doing the 60-minute challenge. So that was one of the first races that I did, and getting that windbreaker was just a highlight. That was a really awesome windbreaker. But my first coach was at Chugach, Eleanor Putnam, and she coordinated elementary school running, which was like 4 or 5 weeks, and that was in 4th grade. So I did that 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, and I've always just had an affinity for running. Since that time, I did soccer, but I was good at soccer by merit of my running, and I did basketball, but I was good at basketball, but really not good at basketball, really not good at soccer, just like to hustle and like to move, like to run. So I've always sort of been a runner since I can remember. So it's actually great. In my current station of life, I'm 44, going on 45 now, and having sort of grown up doing all the races here, growing up doing high school races, now coaching high school at South High. I'm an assistant coach for cross country there and a distance track coach as well. I'm in a great place. I feel like from my beginnings to where I'm at, that's kind of my semi-life history without, I guess bragging up myself on my running accomplishments.
Well, there are a lot of them. Tell me a little bit about high school. Were you pretty good in high school, or did you become a much better runner as you matured and got later into your life?
I was a pretty good runner in high school. I think my best cross country finish at the state meet was 8th place. That was my senior year, so that's good. It wasn't. I ended up walking on in college, so I wasn't good enough to get a scholarship at Montana State, but I was good enough to walk on and get attention from the coach. And as I got older, I improved. Running as a sport, you stick with it. You are able to be consistent and avoid major injuries. And generally you improve at least until you're 40 or 50, or if you're Jeff Young, maybe until you're 60. I'm not sure. I think he still might be improving, but so I certainly got a lot better. And in fact, I made a really big jump personally right after I graduated from college. I had a 3-year Achilles injury that just tried to take time off, come back. Still had hurt Achilles, take time off, maybe a month or 2 or 3, come back. Achilles still bothered me. So finally, when I was able to come back, and I ended up finding an insole that actually helped my Achilles tendonitis. I really made some big gains from 2000. I think I started running again in 2002. So at that point, I was 27 years old, and maybe 2001, 2002. And so by the time it was 2004, I really had made some personal big gains, just, mainly associated with training through the winter. I think that's what I would attribute most of my individual success to, is being real consistent over the span of 2 years, including the wintertime.
Now, the first year you won the Lost Lake Run, I think, was 2006. And then if I remember correctly, there was a couple gap years, and then you won it pretty much back to back to back for like 4 or 5 years in a row. What happened between 2006 and that second win?
One of the things that really catalyzed my getting back into running was doing my first marathon, which was the Chicago Marathon, and I want to say that was 2003. And so I had done my first Lost Lake. I think I did. I don't have my history. I had it all written down, but it was pretty early, and sort of what spawned that was a bet with Laird Prosser. So Laird we had seen this race, and we had done the run on a training run, and it's just, if anybody's run Lost Lake, you'd be hard pressed to find an argument that's not just the best trail out there, to do a run. And so of course, we find out there's a race, and Laird had done the race, and I think in his first go, he might have broke the record in his first go, which was held by John Ratcliffe prior to Laird. Wow. And I remember him talking about that run, and he was running scared, I think, because it was Lars Flora maybe who had won the year before, and so Laird really didn't want to get beat by a skier. But so Laird, ran awesome. But so I think my first win was 2006 maybe, and relatively probably far from the record. I can't remember the time, but really what kind of kept me from doing that race was maybe a fall marathon. If I had a fall marathon that was around that same 1 week or 2 week or 3 week span, I might not have done it for that reason. It's really the only thing that interfered with doing Lost Lake for me was a major marathon, and there weren't too many of those. Like you said, I think there was 1 or 2 gaps in there, but that was mainly it.
Yeah. Now, I find your Lost Lake Run accomplishment amazing. And so just to give people an idea, when you ran in 2010, you broke the record. You ran 1:37:13. Minute 36:50 or 49.
1 hour, 36 minutes.
Right. I'm sorry. 1 hour. Yep. All right. But what I wanted to say was, it's a 16-mile course, 15.7 miles. So I did the math. You're just under, just a hair, skosh under 10 miles an hour average speed on that mountain course. I can't imagine if I was being chased by a bear, I might go 10 miles an hour for 20 feet and then collapse. And you were running at 10 miles an hour. That is an amazing accomplishment. Talk to me about how that must feel to be such a great trained athlete, that you're able to accomplish those kinds of speeds on that course. And then obviously, I don't think you ran 10 miles an hour uphill. So how did that vary? I've heard that the course is sort of like a 3-part course. There's the Primrose uphill, then there's the rolling hills, and then it's just down through the gorge. So kind of walk me through 1:36:50, an hour 36:50, and tell me how do you run that trail, and what were the speeds like as you were going through it? It just fascinates me.
Right. Just like you said, it's a 3-part course. You've got the first third, which starts at Primrose Campground and gets up to where you get clear of the trees for the first time, and then you can really see the expanse, and just the sort of the majesty that the trail sort of has for you. So, and then the second third, of course, is as you're up above the tree line, and it's up, down, you know, it doesn't really ever get flat. It doesn't seem like it's either up or down. But the climbs and drops are generally gradual and not prolonged like they are on the way up or on the way down. And of course, that's the last third is the downhill, which is about maybe 5 miles or thereabout, from mile 10 and a half or so to 15 3/4. And so, yeah, so I mean, really, if you break it into thirds, it's one of the reasons it's my favorite race, because you kind of got 3 different parts to it. And so the way I approached it, and the way, you know, my speeds, I guess, I think going up, my slowest miles when I was running fast were anywhere in the maybe 7s or even 8s, you know, maybe low 8s going up some of those really steeper climbs. I feel like that, based on my recollection, maybe the 2nd mile and the 5th mile are 2 of the slower ones just because of the protracted climbs. And so those, you know, I really never focused on pace. Like I never had my splits that I had to hit when I was racing, you know, all the years that I raced. And I think it was maybe 8 years that I raced, 7 or 8 years that I raced. And just 1 year that I didn't win. I had a bad night before, and I had a bad race the day after. But I never focused on splits or getting to the river in a certain time or getting up to that first clearing. I really tried to run that race based on feel. And so one thing I've told people that I've coached and that I did it myself was, I always felt like one of the keys for that first third is recovering on the really steep uphills. You know, it's kind of counterintuitive because most of us are coached and taught that, you know, it's like, oh, you got to power those arms and really take advantage of the hills, past people, because that's where people show weakness. But it's so easy to redline when you're going up those steep hills and you've got such a long run. And so, you know, I wouldn't shut it down on the uphills, but I would certainly run within myself and make it a point not to overdo it, because if you overdo it on those uphills, it makes it really hard to run the downhills and the flatter parts aggressively, because you're trying to catch up with your own cardiovascular effort. And so you need to be moving fast on those downhills and the flats in order to have a fast overall time. So I figured out pretty early on that if I emphasized, you know, the flats and the downs, that was the ticket for me to having a faster time at the race.
I've never heard that, but that's a great strategy. Run within yourself, and on the uphills, almost use that as a recovery opportunity, and then sprint. It sounds like you sprint downhill.
Yeah, the transitions are so important because there's so many of them. You know, that uphill, the first third, it's not just that uphill, right? It's up and then it's flat and then it's downhill and then it's uphill and then it's flat and downhill. So it's really like a roller coaster on the way up. And if you're just jogging on those downs and the flats, you're leaving so much time out there versus, you know, if you scale it back 10% or so on the really rigorous uphills, that just preserves, you know, your energy source for really the whole race. And it's, for most of us, it's, you know, a 2-hour race. I mean, for me now, if I were to race, it'd be a 2-hour race for me, you know, so that's an additional 20 minutes. But for those people out there for 3 hours, 3.5 hours, if you submarine yourself on those uphills, it just, you know, it's got an exponential effect, I think.
So I'm thinking to myself, you're running 7.5, 8 miles an hour uphill, probably 10 miles an hour on the top. That means you're probably going 12 miles an hour coming downhill.
Yeah.
I mean, what is that like? That is fast.
Yeah, those were the splits I was excited to see, because I go out in training and just to try to hit a 5-minute mile is 12 miles per hour, and so to have a chance to break 5 in a 16-mile race, you know, basically. I don't think I ever did it, at least officially. It was, I don't remember ever seeing a 4:58 split, but I remember seeing 5:03, 5:05, you know, 5:07, and some of that downhill, it's pretty crazy when you're running that fast on that downhill with some of the curves. And, you know, the work parties have done so much incredible work. So I think that's happened over the span of the last 15 years, especially. So it's just a little easier to carry that speed in some of those places, but back in the day, it was a real thrill, you know, to run that fast on the downhill.
There was Brad Cruz has written an article on training, and he's run it several times and done fairly well in his age group category. And he made the comment in the training article, which I think is still on the web somewhere. If I didn't fall down at least twice coming downhill, I wasn't running fast enough. I just think, you know, he just puts himself right at that edge all the way down. Now your legs, you've just run 10 miles roughly.
Right.
Now, how do your legs feel? How do your legs hold up on that?
You know, I never seemed to have much of a problem with the legs. It was more of and it seems like this is, I've heard this echoed a lot by other runners, is my stomach more than anything. Just the downhill pounding, and you're just, you know, it's so jarring. I mean, it's really a pretty jarring effect. And certainly the legs are part of it, but I felt like I was always conditioned, you know, whether Lost Lake was my pinnacle race for the fall, or whether I had a marathon maybe 3 or 4 weeks or 5 weeks after. So I think if you're ready for it, and, you know, getting ready for it might mean you've done several runs on the course, you know, where one run at least maybe 3 or 4 weeks before, where you do take that downhill at a pretty aggressive pace. But my stomach, that was real, could be hit or miss, you know, and like would feel like maybe cramps or side stitches as a result of the downhill was the tougher thing for me.
I'll be darned. I had never heard about the stomach. I've heard about people's legs. They'll say that they feel like they're just going to collapse.
Right. Yeah.
Now, kind of on this theme, you knew Laird, obviously, you've already said, and you trained with him, you ran with him, and he had that record for almost 10 years. Now, Laird passed away before you broke that record, right?
Right, yeah.
So here's one of your very best friends. So I remember you were actually, I don't think you were talking to me, you were talking to somebody else, but I was standing at the end of when you broke this record, and it was an emotional moment for you. I mean, it was, I remember some of your words, but can you tell me a little bit about what it was like? You know, here you are, it's one of your very best friends, has held this record for a long time, his memory, and you're finally able to kind of achieve that level. What was that like?
Like you said, I mean, he was one of my probably 2 or 3 best friends, and you know, he's the reason that I ever got into the race, you know, in the first place. I mean, we had talked about it, and he went out and set that record, and shortly after that record, I don't remember if it was the year after or 2 years after, but we had we both coached at Diamond High School, and we had a bet for who was going to win the race when we both ran head to head, and so the stakes were pretty high because the loser of the bet had to read aloud a speech written by the victor. So whoever won the race got to write a speech for the loser to read to the team.
Oh my goodness!
And so I beat Laird, and that was a big win for me. I think Laird was just hanging on to fitness. I think he had, you know, sort of cashed his chips in, and he struggled with diabetes. So the diabetes side of things really put a handicap on his running, and I don't think he even at that time, I don't think he knew it, because it was he'd been coping with diabetes for a while before he recognized that, you know, it was impacting his running. But he passed away, and I hadn't beaten that record. I think that was 2009 that Laird actually passed away. So I'd taken a couple cracks at it. You know, 2006, I think I had a real good run, and maybe 2008, 1 year in there I didn't run it, but in 2010, when I broke the record, I knew I was having a great race. I think there was a really good field that year, if I recollect, and guys like Mark Iverson and Brent Knight and Eric Strabel might have been in that race, and it was really a good race. And back then, I always ran that unless Sam Hill was running, because Sam Hill would run and he was the master on the uphills. But if Sam Hill wasn't in the race, then I was out front, and I had nobody to run with, basically. And I do remember finishing that race, coming down the road, just thinking, you know, I was really proud of what I had achieved. You know, I worked really hard. I feel like Laird brought this sort of massive effort out of me, you know, in order for me to try to break his record. And for him not to be there to see it, you know, it's really sad. I mean, he was, you know, in his early 30s, I think, when he passed away. So 2009, he would have been maybe 32. So yeah, it was real emotional, you know, and I do remember just having a lot of pride to be able to see his name and my name next to each other, you know, on that list. And so, because I didn't snitch that record until then, you know, the years that when I had won the race, I was I don't know what place that put me in the pecking order, the hierarchy of all-time times, but it wasn't number 2, that's for sure. So yeah, that was a moment for me, for sure. That was a really big moment for me.
There's touchstone moments that I have from my time with the race as a race director. So, but hearing you at the end of that race and how much it meant to you and your memory of Laird was definitely one of those, I'll never forget it. It's just one of those moments. And I thank you for that, because it was inspirational as well as emotional. So a year later, you come back and not only break your record, but you were the first one below 137, an hour 37, and then a year later, you're the first one below an hour 36.
Right.
Which is, you went a full minute faster, which on that course, given, how difficult it is, and just as a point of reference, we've had a couple people get close to your record, but they're still just close. I mean, that is and they're very good athletes. I mean, they're fast.
Yeah.
And now, well, this year would have been 10 years. That and what I'm doing, Jerry, is I'm finding different ways to not have the race so you can hold the race. No, I'm just
okay.
But we just announced this is the second year in a row that unfortunately the Los Angeles will not be here. Which just blows me away. But tell me, how did you train? I mean, you trained very hard, but how did you train to break this record not only once but back-to-back years, and kind of just eclipse that record by a minute? Tell me, what is your training process? When did you start? What was your mileage like? Did you do any additional, you said you started training year round. Did you do any additional work on weights or speed work? Or share with us, if you would, your training process.
Sure. Earlier, from 2003 through 2006, I typically, a lot of my running was structured by a fall marathon. So the years that I did Lost Lake, it was more of a springboard into that fall marathon, as maybe like a tune-up race. I did New York a couple times in that span. I did Twin Cities. I might have done Chicago once in there also. But 2007 was the first year that I did a spring marathon. So I did Boston Marathon for the first time in 2007. And so that really changed my whole year up, in the sense that I had to train through the winter time specifically for a marathon, which ends up giving you a really big base, through the winter months, as opposed to running before I'd done. Maybe training for the Heart Run was a big motivator for me early. And so training more on speed in the winter was sort of a big emphasis for me prior to 2007. So 2007 kind of changed things for me, just because having to carry that sort of long endurance fitness into an April marathon. And so, how that affected Lost Lake is I typically would run 2 marathons. I'd run a spring marathon and I'd run a fall marathon. And so once April finished, then I'd have maybe 2 to 3, 4 weeks maybe to reset. And then summer in Alaska is perfect. Like, there is no better place to run, I don't think, than summer in Alaska. And typically Lost Lake, the trail dries out around maybe June, and it's almost always dry by 4th of July, kind of depending on the snow load. But so, that was one of the big differences from 2010 to 2011 is my that whole year fitness. I had come off of an injury in 2009. I had a bad Achilles, a calf injury in 2009, and so I rehabbed from that sometime around spring of 2010 and had just a really great summer, and then set the record at Lost Lake that fall of 2010 or August 2010. But that particular year sort of gave me a really good jumping off point for 2011. And 2011 happened to be the last year, or the last window of qualifying for Olympic trials. So that was a big motivator for me to try to qualify for the Olympic trials marathon. And Lost Lake was a part of that. So Lost Lake was a race that I was going to do prior to running the Chicago Marathon as my final tune-up. Typically I do maybe a half marathon, but I did Lost Lake. And what I remember about 2011 in particular is, so let me take a couple steps back. So So basically my year-round emphasis is as a road marathoner, but because Lost Lake is so important to me, I make it a point to get out there at least probably 4 times during the summer, maybe 5 times during the summer. And one of my key workouts there is to do a race simulation of Lost Lake, where I do an easy 10-minute run, from Primrose, and then 10 minutes of like strides or, gentle pickups. And then I do 2 by 20 minutes at a hard pace that's faster than race pace. So I call that tempo effort, and do 2 by 20 minutes with maybe a 2-minute break in between. And generally by the time that's over, so that's roughly 20, 40, 60 minutes, I'm somewhere around the river crossing, by the bridge, and somewhere around that mile 8, 9, or 10 area. And then I take it easy, and then I get up to the high point of the course, and then really run that downhill hard. So that's my Lost Lake prep workout that I basically did every year. 2011 was different because I was so focused on this marathon that I was hoping to run well, I think around the first week of October. And so I came into Lost Lake not really rested. I had just run close to 100 miles that week. And I remember the weather that year wasn't good. It was a real wet year. It was slippery. And I had taken to running in road racing flats from my success in 2010. I ran in road racing flats and did really well. That was one thing that I really struggled with early on, is trail shoes sometimes just hurt my feet. The 5 miles descent, at the end of the 5 miles of running, my feet were always beat up. So I couldn't find a trail shoe that really seemed to work for me. But so I had my road shoes in 2011, and I was slipping all over the place. I remember coming off the high point and just thinking to myself, and I was out in the lead, but I remember thinking, I'm not even training for this race. I'm training for the Chicago Marathon this year. And I was real upset. I was like, because I felt like I almost, went down on my butt 2 or 3 times. And I just remember saying to myself out loud in my head, I'm not even training for this race. I don't care if anybody comes up and passes me. I just don't even care. And I ran kind of in this defeated state of mind for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and nobody caught up to me. I had a pretty big lead. And then I got really, really angry at myself. I told myself, I was like, I can't believe, because I had kind of quit in my mind a little bit. I had kind of, just said, just to have that kind of negativity enter in the middle of a race is really unlike me. And so I kind of rallied after that. I got really angry, and it really motivated me over the last 3 miles, and I really, really hammered. And I had no idea I was on record pace. I wasn't really doing the math to figure out where I was or anything like that. And I remember popping out onto the road and looking at my watch and thinking, oh my gosh, I'm gonna break 136 here. I couldn't believe it. I just, I had run really well leading up to the top, I guess, and I had that little moment of weakness, but I was so inspired. And then so I ran that last 3/4 mile really fast, and I scared. I think I was 135 in the teens or something like that, or 135. I can't remember exactly what the time was, but it was low 135s. And I remember actually talking to you at the end of that race, and you're like, wow, Jerry, 135? Are you going to be able to break 135? And I thought to myself, oh yeah, I'm going to be able to break 135. Next time I come out. And, I never really got the chance. I ended up with having a couple of heart surgeries, a couple of heart ablations, and that was the peak. Honestly, that race for myself, that was probably my peak effort for all of the fitness that I had ever acquired at any point. And it's so interesting that a race could be so positive while it was so negative for a little part of it too.
Yeah.
Really, I had thrown the towel in for a little bit there. And so
it's like a little Rocky story almost. It's Rocky music, cue music.
Right.
All right, I'm going to finish this.
Right.
Wow. Yeah, 135.17. It was a low 135. 10 years later, that record still stands. It probably, all records do get broken, but but to have a record that lasts for 10 years, for a decade, that's an accomplishment. That's amazing. Let me segue a little bit, because you had some heart trouble, and I can only imagine. You're kind of almost an Olympic level athlete, and then to have that heart issue, how was that for you? Was that a difficult time? And then how long was it before you could run again?
Well, it's interesting. What I have is a congenital electrical issue called Parkinson's White, and basically I've got extra conductivity in my heart where I can get my sort of the pathway of the electrical impulse can get into a bad kind of rhythm and circuit. And so the treatment is typically they do an ablation for it. So it's a real non-invasive. It is invasive. It's a catheter insertion down in your femoral artery. So it's invasive, but I'm not cut open or anything like that for that process. And, the idea is they cauterize some of that hyperconductive tissue. And I had it done twice, and it really didn't resolve my issue. So after the second operation, I just decided, I can just deal with this. And so what happens when I have an issue is I get into a sort of like a atrial fibrillation where my heart rate goes from maybe 160 up to 190 or 200, and it's a real pitter-patter beat. It's not a really strong beat, it's a real soft kind of incomplete beat. And I just run out of oxygen, basically, and I have to stop and wait for it to click back into its normal rhythm. And so I've kind of figured out, I think emotionally, how to deal with that more than anything. Physically, it sort of self-governs itself. When it happens, I just have to stop, and could be 30 seconds, it could be 2 minutes, could be 4 minutes before my heart rate gets back into a normal rhythm, and then I'm good to go again. So it was, emotionally, it was tough. In 2011, I had such great fitness, and it kind of knocked me off. I had this issue at Chicago where I was hoping to run fast, and I thought, well, I can run another marathon in November at Philadelphia, and I just never got to the start line. It just, for whatever reason in 2011, and part of it might have been my fitness. I think part of it, personally, I think part of it's electrolyte driven, but I just wasn't able to string together a bunch of runs without having this issue happen. And so as I've gotten older, like I said, I just kind of learned to manage it. Getting sleep is real important. If I'm running on no sleep, it seems to exacerbate my heart. Nutrition is important for me, and just not having an imbalance of electrolytes, which basically is achieved just by moderation. Don't eat too much of one thing. And in that particular summer, I was eating a lot of potatoes. I was inspired by Harlow Robinson. He ate a lot of potatoes leading up to one of his Crow Pass victories. And I just thought, oh yeah, potatoes, potassium, part of this. It's an important part of some sort of metabolic chain that I had read, and I think that could have been hyperkalemic because I was eating a ton of sweet potatoes that particular year. But so I've kind of learned that just that being having exercising moderation, everything seems to help my heart too. But yeah.
I always wonder in my mind if you didn't have that issue, how low would this record have gotten? I mean, you were training so well and doing so well, and you seemed like you really had everything dialed in, and you had some pretty fast runners that were there with you. So there was a lot of motivation. One of the other things I want to bring up, the Lost Lake Run, I think, is a very unique run for a lot of reasons, right? I mean, the fact that it's on a mountain trail is obviously unique. But the other thing is I release 200 walkers before you start running. So you literally have a moving obstacle course. And how difficult is that to run around those people while you're going at those such high speeds? And I mean, you're obviously focusing on breathing and where your feet are and all those other things.
Right. Yeah, it can be tough. I think I can't remember if it was the first year. It was one of those 2 years, and I remember physically coming up on somebody yelling, and when I run that race, I'm breathing extra loud just because you're moving so fast. And when I'm the first runner, whoever the first runner is, it happens to everybody now that's leading that race. You want to make sure the people ahead of you know you're coming, and sometimes yelling at the last minute isn't the best way to achieve that. So I breathe like an animal. I mean, really, I hate to say it, I just breathe really loud, really forcefully, and I think that actually helped me with my stomach too, on the descent. But yeah, I do physically. I remember one time coming up on a gal, and she didn't hear me, and I had yelled, and she didn't hear me, and I came up and I did this bear hug around her. I just kind of moved her to the side of the trail because I didn't, and I was running 5-minute pace probably, so there wasn't much I could do other than just kind of move her. And I just remember thinking, wow, I can't believe neither one of us got hurt there. So that was, but generally people are, they hear you coming and they're they're happy to get off the trail for you. You know, it's one of your rules, I think, that you're not allowed to have headphones in, and that's a critical rule too. I think, you know, around that time was when people were really into listening to music too, and there might have been one time where I had a runner that had headphones, just didn't hear me, but yeah, that's tough. I mean, that's I feel like because it's become so popular, that's kind of an equalizer because of the trail improvements. If someone were out to go out and break that record, and I know it'll get broken, Patrick, it'll get broken probably sooner than later. I think the fact that the race hasn't happened in the last 2 years, a guy like Aaron Fletcher, who has yet to race that, you know, I know he'll be a name when he races it.
Well,
he's a guy.
You've got the first and fourth fastest time. So there's been two finishes between your 2010 and 2011. They haven't gotten over the fastest time, but they've
Matt Shyrock, I know, was the guy that got that #2 time, and I don't think he was even aware of it, to be honest. I think he might have been out there just racing, and that was a heck of a good year that year. That year that Matt got that second time, because I think Jacob Kirk and Jim Shine, and there was a good field that year. Scott Patterson, I think, in that race too. So
and Patterson and Shyrock, I think, were the two between you, your first and second fastest time. There. So. Now, I should call it the Jerry Ross rule, because I didn't even think about headphones until, and then you sent me an email and said, hey, if you could remind people not to do that. And so, yeah, that's a standard rule now, and we remind people at the starting line. We also remind people that there's runners coming, and you should listen for them and get off the trail so that you can get through. But, you know, I just think about, you know, here you are, you're running as fast as you can. It's a narrow trail. And you've got 200 people, because there's about 200 walkers that go out ahead of you. That's just amazing. So let me transition now a little bit. You're now a part of the Alaska Endurance Project. Tell me, what is the Alaska Endurance Project? What does it do? Is that your vocation now? What kind of things does the Alaska Endurance Project do?
Yeah, it's basically we organize a training group that meets year-round on Wednesday nights, and so it's grown, but this is how it originated. Is we had a Wednesday night training group that, you know, the main focus was half marathon and marathon training, and we try to pepper in some trail runs, and then Lost Lake is one of the more popular runs. So sometime in July we'd start saying, hey, let's get out to Kincaid, this workout will help you get ready for Lost Lake, and we'd maybe you know, make some recommendations, but for the most part, just a training group. And then we had a morning training group, and Todd List coaches that for me now. And so it's so I have the evening group with Todd, a relatively big group. It grows to close to 70 people in the winter time. Then maybe 3 or 4 years ago, Najibi Quinn and Najibi has run Lost Lake a few times. She's a well-known trail runner. We started a trail mountain running group with more of an emphasis. It's a group that meets 2 days a week, starting in May. Although this year, because of COVID-19, we started in June. But we meet 2 days a week, with one day as a kind of a mountain marathon type, you know, hiking type workout emphasis, and then we have another run during the week that's more of a trail running emphasis. And so we've always been kind of cognizant of the type of workouts that people would need to do to get ready for the mountain or trail races, you know. And so it's been really popular. I mean, it's really great. It's not my primary vocation right now. I'm a school teacher at South Anchorage High School, but it's something that it's real important to me, I guess, just to be connected to the community in that sort of sense, you know. And it's I've got people all the time that are asking, okay, do I have to be fast, you know, because Najibi and I both, you know, and Taco and I are carrying an aura of being elite maybe, but it's really for all levels. You know, we try to set up our workouts in venues where, you know, we're doing an out and back. So if you're slow, we're gonna, you know, everyone turns around at the same time. So basically they're out for the same amount of time, starting and finishing together. Or we'll set courses up on loops, you know, even in the mountains maybe, where we have like maybe a 10-minute loop or a 12-minute loop or a 14-minute loop when we do repeats on that loop. And so the faster people might do 5 or 6 loops, and the slower people might be doing 2 loops or something like that. But they're more time-based workouts as opposed to distance-based workouts. So, you know, it's great because it makes it less exclusive and sort of gets everybody out, but trail and mountain group have been really successful. I think particularly for that reason where, people feel a lot safer when they're out on the trails with other people. So, so yeah, it's been a lot of fun for me, I guess.
That's wonderful. I mean, in a sense, I almost feel like you're saying I'm giving back. I mean, I've gotten so much from running, and now it's my opportunity to kind of give some of that back. I don't want to speak for you, but you're passionate about this, and the fact that you're designing this for all abilities is fantastic. So someone that is just getting back into running or just starting running, they could find a place with your group, which is amazing. I spend a lot of time in gyms, and the one thing I say to myself when I see someone in a gym that is heavy and overweight is, thank you for coming to the gym. I mean, of all the people that really should be in the gym, they are going to benefit the most. And I'm very encouraging of those kinds of things, because it says you're doing something positive. It's a longer road, but it's still, I mean, that one step process, and you'll get there. So I love that you're doing that. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I have to say, it's wonderful being an Alaskan, but when I got connected to the running community in Alaska through the Lost Lake Run, I have never seen a more generous group of people in my life. They're just a fantastic group, and they're across the demographic. I mean, you've got every kind of person, but when they show up on race day, they're all the same person. They're a runner. Yeah. And it's amazing. I love that. I'd like to keep kind of thinking about this Alaska Endurance Project for a bit, but do you also talk to people and coach them on things like diet, sleep, those types of things, or are those things that you recommend a book, or they go find another coach? How do you handle those things?
Usually I'll refer people to experts in those fields. So we had a real good nutritionist in Alaska, and I don't know if she's still up here, Ricky Keene. I don't know if you've heard her name before, but she was associated with UAA, and she's helped Ann Dalton, I think, with some nutrition, recommendations. But so typically I'm more of a moderation guy, and I'm the kind of person that advocates to go see somebody that's really a specialist there. I think it's Matt Fitzgerald, I want to say, wrote a book about racing weight, which doesn't necessarily mean lose a lot of weight to get fast and run. So there's some good authors out there of specific nutritional books, and he's one. But one thing that I will have my athletes do is, I think it can be really valuable to get a blood test when you're feeling good, and you see kind of what your levels are like in terms of certain vitamins and minerals. And because then if you're feeling bad and things aren't going well, you can compare you to you, I guess, as opposed to just getting a blood test. And there's a really wide range, and, runners and athletes are different than, we have a different demand on our system that just a person that's, just every day, not necessarily doing a 16-mile trail run, and so I think to be able to compare yourself to you is really an important thing. And so, so that is one thing that I'll have people do, is just, get those blood tests, be aware of what your potassium levels are like, and your H&H, your hematocrit, your hemoglobin are like, and, but then maybe have an expert help you with that too. So yeah, typically I don't feel like I'm that expert. So I don't try to make too strong of a recommendation there, other than, too much of one thing can be, I think, not a good thing. And if you just eat, that's my own rule of thumb, I guess. So, yeah. And then in terms of other supplemental things like strength, I think as I've gotten older, I've recognized that doing some cross training, flexibility and strength are really an important thing. And I think you can achieve a lot in your running, explosive type sprints, that really work the range of motion, and that power, doing drills and strides that do the same thing, that emphasize range of motion and certain power. I think those are really important things to carry your longevity. I know that as I've gotten older, and now I'm basically 10 years removed from when I was my fastest, I've noticed my stride. I have to do a lot of work to keep my stride at a nice long length. I find that my hip flex or my hip mobility is something that's really decreased as I've gotten older. It's just harder to open up the hips. And so, you can go to YouTube and Google hip mobility for runners and find, a lot of really good exercises. And there's a few reputable sources out there. There's one that I would highly recommend to anybody. It's called Runners Connect. And so if you Google Runners Connect with anything that you're interested in, it's a really great online source. Could be injuries, Runners Connect, Achilles tendonitis, could be nutrition, Runners Connect, anemia or whatever kind of nutritional issue you might be having. And it's a compendium of very, very good information. So that's one online place that I send people.
Wonderful recommendation. Runners Connect. I'll try to remember that. I didn't bring a pen, but I'll try to remember that and put that in the notes. Last week we had Lisa Keller come in and talk about training. She trains groups, and one of the emphasis she had was on smart training, which is what you're talking about. And there's a lot of similar themes, not surprisingly, I guess. But one of the things she said in terms of longevity, as you age, and she's my age, so we've got about 10 years on you. But she trains so that she doesn't have an injury, so that she can train another day. And so, as you were saying, when you ran, you did a lot by feel. Do you still, when you run, do you go by the feel when you're training, and when you can push a little harder and when you should back off a little bit?
Yeah, I for sure, definitely, and I think, as you get older too, the rest becomes more important. You need just a little bit more time. And, it becomes a big issue for you, because if you're trying to do a hard workout or a hard effort and you're not rested, then your risk of injury is so much higher. And so developing that feel, I think, is something, unfortunately, that takes you a certain amount of time, and a certain amount of miles that you've run before you get a real feel for, should I back off or should I not back off? So I think until you get to that point, there's a real conservative rule of thumb, which is the 10% rule, which says you shouldn't increase your mileage by more than 10% in a week, which that's not very much. If you run 20 miles in a week, that means that's 22 miles the next week. So it's pretty easy to cheat that, but I think that sort of can keep you within your bounds. And then maybe getting to a point where it's like, okay, I'm not going to increase my mileage to anything more than 10% of the prior 4 weeks, where you can then oscillate a little bit and build, recover, build, recover, build. But that's one of the big keys for anybody, regardless of your age or speed, is consistency. And, the one thing that derails consistency is injury. So being injury-free is one of the big success. That's one of the big keys to success. Yeah,
and I think that can be said for any sport you're involved in. And it's so true. And there's so many themes. I lift weights and I want to get stronger. And so Lisa last week talked about the same type of thing. In weightlifting, they call it waves. So you build up to a point, and then you down deep. They call it deloading, or you take a week, and you don't necessarily take a week off. You just take a week easier. So you go like 50 or 60% of your previous load, and let your body recover, and then you build back up a little higher. And in weight training, they're thinking if you can improve yourself 5% per month in weight in whatever you're lifting, well, over 50 or 12 months, that's 60. That's 5 times 12. That can be 60% improvement, which is substantial. It's actually that's going to be hard to achieve consistently. So 10%, it adds up over time. It might not seem like much, but my goodness, that really does kind of compound quickly. Absolutely.
That's good rule of thumb.
So I want to wrap up here. And so one of the things I always ask the guests is I say, what would be the one take-home message you'd like people that watch this as a webinar to take back with them? What's the one message you would like them to carry away?
Well, if you haven't done Lost Lake and you're waiting for the race, obviously don't wait for the race. Get out there and get on the course, experience it. It's one of the best experiences that you can have, is just being out on the course and one of the best things that you can do for preparation for the race too. Grab a friend. It's really nice to grab actually 3 or 4 friends, and then you can drop a car off at one end, and then you've got you don't have to get out and hitchhike, which I used to do with Laird. We'd go back and hitchhike to the start of the run after. Usually we'd hitchhike actually before we ran, so we had our car at the finish. We drive to the finish, hitchhike to the start, and then run. So we didn't impose sweaty bodies on some car that we didn't know. We were relatively fresh, but it's just such an amazing race and course, and probably a lot of people that watch this will have raced it before. And so, I think spending time out there and figuring out what your strengths are out on the course, whether it's climbing or running downhill, and emphasizing those strengths on race day, but also working on your weaknesses in practice. I think how I approached that race, and there were a lot of battles that I had with Sam Hill, and I think on that race I always came out on top. He was a much better climber, and I was a better downhill runner, but I never made it a point to try to hang with him on the uphills. I'd let him go on those uphills, knowing that if I could focus on my strengths later, that would be the best solution for me. And so, yet when we trained together, I would try to hang with him on those uphills. I think working on your weakness when it's not race day is a really good strategy. But then on race day, just focus on those strengths and then have confidence too. But yeah, it is a real shame. The last 2 years, I can't believe it. 2 years in a row of no Lost Lake, and I think we're all hurting a little bit from missing these events. So hopefully I see you guys out there on the trail training this summer. I know I'll be out there at least 2 or 3 times. We're talking about going down next week. I heard a secondhand report from my friend Ryan, who heard it from Hannah LaFleur, who lives down there in Seward, that the trail is in good shape. So, so that's encouraging. At least people are out there running already.
That's wonderful. Jerry, thank you so much for taking time out today and sharing your experiences, your story, your training. This has been a real pleasure for me to get a chance to talk with you. When they break that record, maybe if you're there, you could be the one to actually hand them that first place trophy and congratulate them. So
yeah, I'd love to. It'll happen, Patrick. It'll happen, and I'd love to do. I'd love to think that I motivated the person who breaks it at least a tenth the way that Laird motivated me to break it. So I hope it's an Alaskan that does it. I hope it's not, because there's a lot of people that could probably do it, and to know somebody that did it and maybe know a little bit of the backstory would be meaningful to me for sure. So that would be great.
Fantastic. Jerry, thank you so much. Have a great evening, and we'll get this on the YouTube channel within the next day, and it'll be out there for forever and ever.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, take care.